Welcome, Ministry Pivot. This is Reverend Russ. Super excited to have you with us on today, whether you're watching, whether you are listening. Just so honored you decided to click on and listen and hear and see what we're doing. I have some awesome guests with me today as we talk about pivots for the new year. But before that, don't forget to go on to ministrypivot.com for the latest articles, also for the latest conversations, also just for insights. Don't forget to join the mailing list so I can send you information and you'll be able to learn from that. And also don't forget to share, to comment, and subscribe on Ministry Pivot on all social media platforms so that others can get to know. Big shout out to Givelify. Super excited for my partnership with them. I wrote an article a couple weeks back on 5 pivots for the new year, and they posted the article as they do all of the articles, and I wanted to have a deeper dive with that. And so today I am honored to have, or tonight, whenever you're listening, I'm honored to have with me Pastor Reverend Dr. Danielle Brown, who's the senior pastor of Shiloh Baptist Church in New Jersey. Also honored to have Reverend Dr. Bobby Manning, who is the senior pastor of the Heights Church in the DMV area. And also honored to have the Reverend, soon to be Dr. Reverend Walter Jr., Thomas Jr., who is the senior pastor of First Baptist Church of Steelton in Pennsylvania. They're going to come and share their thoughts. So let me bring them onto the platform now. Walt, Pastor Danielle, Pastor Bobby, thank y'all for joining on today.
Thank you.
Hey, Reverend Russ. Good to be here.
Awesome. So I appreciate you all joining us. I appreciate you all sharing with us. I do want to open with this thought, and I kind of said it in our time, y'all. We have time before the time. Y'all know y'all know how y'all have meetings before the meeting. So we had time before the time, and I shared a couple things, but I do want to ask you all if there was one thing that you thought was pivotal for pastors to pivot. See what I did there? If you thought was pivotal for pastors to pivot in this new year, what would that one thing be? And we kind of expound a little bit. And I'm hoping that the conversation just kind of flows. But I did want to start with that one question. If there was one thing that you thought was pivotal for pastors to pivot this year, what would it be? Anybody can start. Or somebody could start.
And they answered him not a word. Okay, so I guess I'll jump in. Oh man, there are so many, and it's kind of hard for me to come down on one, but I'll just speak for myself at the Heights. I think that one thing that I've noticed that I've had to do is I've had to reteach people how to engage church because so many are engaging primarily online. Pre-pandemic, people engaged primarily in person, and online was supplemental. That has now reversed, and now people are engaging. A vast majority of the people, I don't know if I could estimate percentages, but the vast majority of the people, anecdotally, are engaging online and supplementing with some in-person interaction.
Yeah.
And so now we cannot, as pastors, assume that people know how to engage online because of the way we are conditioned to engage online in spaces outside of church.
Yeah.
In spaces outside of church, we engage online primarily as consumers. Content consumption is the name of the game. And so if I'm enjoying YouTube, I'm consuming. If I'm enjoying Netflix, I'm consuming. If I'm scrolling Instagram, I'm consuming. If I'm on Facebook, I'm consuming. Well, these are the methods by which we are bringing church into people's homes, which means that they are primarily conditioned to consume. But we all know that the church is that church is not content consumption. It should be Christian community. Yeah. And so now I'm finding myself every Sunday, every Wednesday, teaching people, okay, I know this is what you're conditioned to do, but let's do this differently. And I think that's a big way that we kind of stop wishing that this time will be over. We could just come back to church. I don't know if it's ever going to be the same. So in the meantime, let's make sure that we teach the people how in all of the spaces, and I'm sure we'll talk about the different spaces, but in all of the spaces to make sure that you know how to engage, is particularly if you're engaging online.
That's great. That's great. That's great. Pastor Danielle?
So I completely agree with what Dr. Manning has shared. In addition to this, I think one pivot among the many pivots, right, is to have your finger on the pulse of your local church.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I think that in this season, the local church wins. The local church that does well at doing the church is the church that wins. But for a long time, we have had this idea of these kind of broad stroke things. And so whatever the most popular people were doing, or whatever the things look like that look good on social media, whatever those people were doing is what we've tried to emulate in our, spaces. What works for somebody else probably will not. If this pandemic has not taught us anything, right, is that there is no cookie cutter way or method of doing ministry, and you cannot execute effective ministry void of being conscious of your own people, the people that God has put in your church. And so we get even, with this kind of global situation, or all of the consumers that are peeking in on social media platforms and these virtual platforms, the truth is, when they do drop in, what will determine success or no success at all for you and for your ministry is when people come, they've got to experience something that is as good as what they saw.
That's good. That's good. That's good.
So substance and authenticity, we can't get away from that, but we've got to come back to this idea of having our finger on the pulse of the ministries that God has trusted us with. I can't pastor my church the same way that Dr. Thomas pastors his, or that Dr. Manning pastors theirs, because I pastor Shiloh. And one of the fundamental things, without, just kind of talking too much, is that I was elected to a church in the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
So I had one way of thinking about ministry, but I came to a church that never really closed in the pandemic. Shiloh closed for about 3 weeks. And so I am pastoring a church that never got out of the rhythm of coming to church. And so when I hear people say, well, people don't come to church anymore. It's not true. We've taken in almost 50 members in 4 months.
Wow.
In a pandemic. But our congregation, they're showing up, right? And they're coming and even more. And a lot of the people have connected with us because they were following us on social media. But then when they've come in, the report is, oh my goodness, it's even better in person. And so also don't undershoot the power of the local church, right? That everything is not virtual. Some people are really tired of this whole virtual thing. And so you've got to make sure that you're still building the for real and in person, and having the finger on the pulse of the people that God has called you to pastor and the church that God has allowed you to lead.
Amen.
That's great. That's great. Well, Pastor Walt.
For us, I think Bobby touched on it a little bit. One of the biggest pivots for me became having to actually say goodbye to what used to be, and really say, or preach a eulogy, if you will, over church from 2019 and beyond and ahead. Closing out last year, I really wrestled with what was going to be next. A lot of times we talked about what was going to be after the pandemic, when we get back to normal, and I really had to accept that that was never going to happen. Whatever was next was going to be different than what had previously been. And for somebody like me, and for the church where I pastor, traditional Baptist church, normal was God. What was tradition, that was it. That's the way we did things. That's the way it was going to happen. Now we were flung into this fully virtual thing. And now what's going to be next? Are we just going to open back up and do what we were doing? And the pivot became not looking solely at what was or solely at what's next, but learning how to live with the blending of the two. Learning how to live with the thorn, live with the limp, live with COVID being not just a pandemic, but now an endemic, as they were saying, having no end, but simply being something that always exists. What does this now mean for us as a church? What does this now mean for how we do ministry? And so the biggest pivot for us, and the one we had to really begin to shift to say, was, how do we live with this? Not in a holding pattern until it's done, or not fully changing everything, because how do we live? How do we minister? How do we reach people? How do we grow with this thing still going on? For us, that became the biggest shift. And so we had to transform some worship spaces and put some new structures, and even putting now new ministries in place to really help us function with it, to help us be really one church in two locations, online and virtual, so that one is not slighted because of the other. So one thing, we may talk more about it later, like one thing we did was flip our fellowship hall to become our sanctuary/studio, because we could do better in person and virtual there than we could in our sanctuary that is more so suited for 1900s worship than it is for 2000 and beyond. So that became the big pivot for us, was really learning how to live with this and function as a church, function as a ministry with COVID is our reality.
Yeah, no, I think that's great, and I want to pull a piece out of what you said, and then also Pastor Danielle said a minute, and Pastor Bobby, you said a piece of it, but I want to. So the thought of, and I got this from Bishop Thomas, and I wrote a thing on it with Fidgetal because he gave me the term, and I wrote the whole thing on it. But I want to talk about the Fidgetal space, but I also want to talk about what Pastor Danielle said about that local still matters, right? There's an article I wrote a minute ago that talks about the fact that at the end of the day, like, it's a reason why there's like a billion Starbucks or a billion McDonald's, like, because local still matters. But to what you said, Pastor Danielle, what I heard you say, that the quality though of what you present has to be taken up a notch. And for me, that and Fidgetal kind of run together. And so I'd love to hear you all's thoughts, because one of the pivots that I wrote was just thinking about, you have to pivot your view on attendance, right? Have to pivot your view on what you're counting, what you're aiming for, because attendance looks different. And shout out to my pastor, Pastor Watley, Kingdom Fellowship, because he a long time ago wanted us to focus on stage as studio and really pulpit as studio. And I kind of hear that in this, but I want you all, anybody can jump, but I really want to talk about the Fidgetal space and the quality, which I heard Pastor Danielle say, of your local still matters.
Let me, since I was last time, I'll go first this time. Let me talk about, I guess, from the worship perspective and service, rather, what we present. You look at us today on this ministry pivot experience. All of us have made sure our backgrounds are clear. Our cameras are of a certain quality level. Our audio is not just ambient sound. We've taken the time and taken the effort to make sure we present ourselves in a quality way. Same thing has to happen with the church, where traditionally it was the in-person perspective. So making sure the choir sounded good, making sure, we knew what songs were coming. There was a run sheet or a planning sheet, what have you, that all of that was done, that the greeters and parking lot attendants were all straight. Now we got the virtual side too. So it's no longer just somebody looking through a peephole at what's happening in the sanctuary, but it is the sound checks. Somebody monitoring the audio to make sure that things are not peaking and not squealing. It is somebody doing color correction on the cameras. It's coming in early to make sure things look presentable and what have you. And so our quality perspective and our eye for quality, if you will, now has a two fronts, both in person, both virtual. But the virtual side has to be of such another level because there's so many options out there. Mm-hmm. We're all on, a lot of folk on at the same time on Sunday morning, whether it's somewhere between 9 and 1 o'clock. So many churches are going live. They can watch you, click off to somebody else, watch somebody's replay. So you got to make sure that your stuff is tight. Again, not to try and outdo somebody, but simply so that what God is presenting through your ministry has a place and a space where those whom God is sending to you can receive it and not be distracted, because distractions become real and are heightened in the virtual space. So our quality of what we present on Sundays becomes heightened. But even throughout the week, what we present, and one of your pivots was about teaching. What we're putting out there for our Bible study experiences, for our growth experiences. We have so much at our disposal now in this virtual space where we can do it in creative ways. I mean, shoot, in our church, we've had visits from folk who we would never have in person. We've had guest artists come from Life Church, from Kingdom Fellowship. We had Vice President Kamala Harris in worship All this stuff we taking full advantage of because we now have these new resources available in this virtual space. And so it helps us to heighten our quality, even though a lot of what we've done traditionally can be somewhat diminished. Virtual presents a new opportunity for us if we really grasp it to take our quality to another level and things we could never do in the traditional way.
That's good.
I think this part too, that having making sure that what is happening in real time is quality, also has to do with the things that we do beyond what the things look like, right? So yeah, we know we've had to amp up, right, our presentation and lighting, and I probably every week I'm talking about, hey, wait a minute, my hue is a little different, so y'all have to dim those lights, or that's camera 2 is gonna wash me out. People think I'm sick because I look pale on camera 2, right? So that's every week. But also remember that we are in the business of people, and human nature requires human interaction. So for our business, this virtual can only go so far, right? So making sure that what is happening in real time is tight, that also speaks to our systems, our structures, right? So the worst thing that can happen is for things to look amazing on a virtual broadcast, but when people show up at your church, your people are cold. Your systems and structures are not in place. That everything is set up with so much focus on the virtual experience that people are tripping over cords and wires and don't, the in-person experience is no good. Those kind of things. Koinonia, right? When people get sick, how are they tended to? There are some things that are traditional church that will never go out of style. Congregational care. Are the systems, are the people in place? Are people coming, and people didn't survive a pandemic to come into our churches in person and be mistreated, right? Are we welcoming? Do people feel loved? Do people feel like our physical spaces are worth coming to, right? Because when they get there, they feel peace. They experience the power of God. So I think when I speak to the quality, right, of the real experience, virtual will drive people ultimately back in to your churches. But we cannot be so unbalanced that everything is about the virtual experience that we forget that we are not just production companies, right? But we are the church. And the church has to do what Jesus called the church to do. And so that's what I'll add to that.
If I could just take what Pastor Thomas said and what Pastor Brown has said and try to sew it together, because I think they're hitting on so many different vital points, and I appreciate where they both are leading the discussion, because when it comes down to it, what we have is an opportunity to engage people. Y'all, 30 years ago, the front door of your church was the front door of your church. Today, the front door of your church is your online and social media presence. People, before they ever make it to your church to experience the koinonia that Dr. Brown is talking about, they visited your church 5 times or more already online. And so it's important to understand that the online engagement really is designed to be the front door. The difficulty of the pandemic is the front door became the living room. So all of us are sitting on the porch. And the reality is we need to do what we can to make sure that the front porch is inviting, so people will want to come and sit on the front porch, but also to make sure that we do what's necessary to make sure that when people come through the front door, they find the living room a place where they can sit down, and as my mama and my grandmama would say, sit down and stay a while. And so it's important for us to have a both and approach. If I can say this, and kind of drill down on something that Walt was saying just a couple of minutes ago. Early in the pandemic, Facebook tricked us. And we got to make sure that we understand. Love the Facebook, but they tricked us. Okay. They tricked us into thinking that we were all mega church pastors, because we said we went virtual, and man, look, we had thousands of people watching our online service. No, they weren't. We had thousands of people scrolling, clicking in for 5 seconds, saying, oh, okay, and then scrolling some more. That ain't the same. Okay. And so we had to, and then right around August, we saw all of our online numbers dip. Every church was like, wait a minute. And what happened is the algorithm shifted, and they stopped showing us to everybody like they were around Easter of 2020. And so we had to recalibrate and just remember, first of all, that people are not, the vast majority of your online views are not going to come because somebody was scrolling and saw your church and said, you know what, that church experience looks different from the other church experiences. Let me sit and watch this for the whole time. It's not happening. The vast majority of the people who are engaging your church online are doing so for the same reasons that people came to your church pre-pandemic, because their cousin, their neighbor, their friend, their relative, their coworker invited them and said, check out my church right here. And then they engage. And that's why, none of us pastors want to look at the part in the in the statistics in the post broadcast statistics that say the vast majority of your views were less than 15 seconds. It hurts our pride a little bit. And so just remembering, and I say all that to say, we're sharpening and polishing our online experience, but most of us aren't mega churches, which means our online experience isn't going to be like the mega church. But what Pastor Walt was saying a few minutes ago, we're not trying to make it full production. For most of us, we don't have the staff or the budget to do that. Pastor Reverend Russ does, but the rest of us don't have the staff or the budget to do full on production. What we're trying to do is make it so that we have as little distraction as possible on the feed. As little as little that would cause people to say and then scroll, or and then click off, because it's easier to click off something than it was years ago to put the church finger up and walk out of church.
I think that's great, and I want to hit on two things. That one thing that you said, Pastor Manning, and then I want to throw something to Pastor Danielle that I want us to kind of wrap together. But that first point that we talked about with attendance, right? I think you got to look for something. You can't look at attendance the way you've always looked at attendance, right? Especially in this hybrid field. I again, shout out my pastor. Pastor Watley allowed me to share with staff the other day. And one of the things that I'm still developing it, but there's a book called Sticky Church, right? And he talks about mainly small groups. But the spawn off from that for me now is with the attendance is we have to really figure out what are our sticky numbers, right? What are the sticky numbers that allow people not just to pass through, but to literally stick, right? So in the AME context, right, that's our new members, that's our right hand of fellowship, right? That's our baptism. But what are the sticky numbers? And then how do you engage toward those? Because to Pastor Manning's point, some of these other numbers are fleeting, right? They kind of set us up. So I wanted to make that comment, and we can share on it. But Pastor Danielle, I also want to ask around the core, right? So when you were talking about like camera 2 and the people kind of setting you up, and you all are at different churches, which I appreciate. Walt, you're in PA. Bobby, you're out in this area. Pastor Danielle, you're in New Jersey. What does your core, right? One of the pivots was core, which really is your people who aren't paid, right? What does that look like? How do you engage those who are listening, those who are watching? How do you pivot that during this season when it's a lot going on and our people may be like, yeah, this is a lot too, right? So how have you all navigated that? Pastor Daniel, I'm gonna throw it to you first. Around the core. I mean, anything else you want to talk about? Obviously, I said some other stuff, but I was really thinking when you said that yeah, we need people to do this thing. That's the core, but the core has shifted some.
So the blessing for me is that I'm coming in as a new pastor. So inevitably, right, I took time to learn the people, right, have conversations. Who's here, who's there. I knew in mind, because I came in the door kind of with a standard for how I like things to be. I served as in an executive pastor role for several years before I came into this one. So I kind of already had some things that were like, this is how I do what I do. And what I found was that there were a lot of people who were on the sideline. And there were a lot of younger people who were on the sideline who had ideas, but did not have the platform or the opportunity to really, flesh them out. And those ideas were really ideas that would push Shiloh kind of to next level in terms of our social media presence, technology, and all of that. And so engaging people who were not necessarily engaged, but were here and just waiting. You'll be surprised how many people are just waiting for someone to say, hey, come try this. There also was a core of people, so a ministerium of about 13 preachers. But in this season, associate ministers aren't getting preaching opportunities unless they are itinerant, right? And so it was a re-envisioning how they could function. Dr. Manning talked about the front porch, but what I've done is said, hey, this is how you would function in service, but I need you to also function like that in the comments. So the sticky team, right? Mm-hmm. I need y'all in the comments in real time. When people are saying, hey, good morning, Shiloh, I need y'all on it. Good morning, my name is Minister so-and-so, and we're so glad that you're here. If you need anything in this virtual experience, just hit me up and I've got you. And so they're in the comments. And so now that gives preachers who would have otherwise kind of been on the sideline, now they have some new things to do, right? New opportunity. People are engaging them and they're really becoming the face and fuel of the church. In addition to new members coming in, I am not making new members wait to get involved. We have some folks that joined the church, but they were already in the choir stand. And so day one, I said, we're going with an open church model. If people want to serve, they can serve. And every ministry has to have the capacity to open the doors of the church. We're not just going to wait for Sundays, especially when, with regard to our views, we get one set of views on Sunday. By Wednesday, that's when people are watching Shiloh. Mm-hmm. Like we get the largest number. And those people, talking about back-end analytics, those people are watching throughout the service, right? Those are the longer watchers. Those are the people that are fast forward into the word and they're listening for the entire preaching moment, right? Wednesday.
Yeah.
Also, I made some changes with new members.
Okay.
We no longer have new members classes, but when you join Shiloh, you get 5 touches. We have a 5-touch model. So the first, there's the walk, then you get a communication from me, you get a communication from whomever your deacon will be. You get a communication from, if you're a man, the leader of the men's ministry will call you. If you're a teenager, the youth minister calls you. And then you have your new members class and celebration. And it's a 1-day event. A few hours in the morning at 11 o'clock, I come in, all of the ministry heads come in, they get to put a face with names and everybody kind of does a commercial for their ministry. And so far we've had 3. And so far those new members have connected with ministries because we're putting people, with them. There's also like a virtual option for that because we have people that are joining who are not in this locale. So I think just creating spaces where there can be people engagement, that it's not like we're leaving you out there, and giving people opportunity, hearing them out. What ideas do you have that we don't necessarily have? And then make room, right? Make room for those things. And so far, we have a lot of new people that have been at Shiloh who never really served, but in this season, they're like, hey, let me jump in there. I can serve here. And so some of the folks who have been here a while, they're like, oh my goodness, like so-and-so has never served. I never even heard them say, 5 words, but look at them. And I think a lot of it has to do with just creating spaces for people to be who they are, how they are, and how, and express their gifts in the context of church.
That's
Work
awesome.
will stick because they become stakeholders.
That's awesome.
I think one of the shifts to piggyback again off Dr. Brown's point in regards to making sure that the experience, the in-person experience, making sure that membership has its privileges, and I think that one major pivot that we've been making is in regards to our discipleship. Of course, we had life groups, etc., and we brought those online and made sure that when we brought the life groups online, they became a little bit, I should say, more popular, more people engaged, because it was just easier to engage. Something we hadn't thought about before the pandemic is bringing them online, because folks, when they're getting off work and they have to go home, get settled, get dinner done for the kids, all of that, and then turn around and come back to church, it was harder for people to stick. But if I can go home, get my home settled, or if I was already home, turn off the work computer, get everybody settled, get dinner started, and then go to the table and do my life group, do my Bible study, it just became easier. And so, of course, there's the ease factor. But then we started thinking, okay, life groups, yes, but what other touch points are there to make sure? So I walked through with my discipleship team. I said, hey, we've been building life groups, but Jesus had different levels of disciples. Jesus had the 3, Jesus had the 12, but also Jesus had the 70. And then Jesus had the crowd. And Jesus dealt with each of those in different manners. And so we've been thinking through, okay, we've been doing great in engaging the 3, we've been doing great in engaging the 12, but what can we do to make sure, especially now in the pandemic, where again, less people are coming into the building? We're not as blessed as Pastor Brown, where it was only a 3-week kind of layoff before getting back into the sanctuary. Our sanctuary really wasn't large enough for us to do that. And so how do we make sure that the 70, the people who are not quite fully engaged, in a life group every week, and face-to-face accountability, but they are engaged, they love Jesus, they're walking with Jesus, how do we make sure that we're pulling them in as well? And so just thinking through the different levels of engagement was one thing for us. But then also, I've been on my deacons behind, Reverend Russ. I've been on there behind, especially during the pandemic, because I need our members to hear from us.
That's good. That's good.
I need y'all calling I know your member list is long, and I know you got other things to do. Call your members, text them, email them, whatever you got to do, messenger pigeon. Just don't let me find out. And I told deacons, I said, the only responsibility you have as a deacon, especially during the pandemic, because you're not serving communion elements, the only responsibility you have as a deacon is to call your members. Because if you let me find out that somebody is reaching out to me and they ain't heard from their deacon, you're gonna have to deal with this pastor, and you're gonna have to deal with the bad side of them. I'm Bruce Banner and I'm Hulk, and you can deal with me as Bruce, or we can Hulk smash up in this joint.
Yeah. We want the Bruce side. We want the Bruce.
So do I.
We want the Bruce.
That's good. And I just want to jump in, because Dr. Manning, when you talk about the 3, it's easy for us in the pandemic, right, to get lost with the 3, because that's what we see: the cameraman, the sound people, right? And we're engaging them so much more that we really forget that even the person who never engages still deserves a phone call.
Amen. Right.
Look, when Pastor Danielle was talking earlier, I was taking notes. I forgot the topic we were even on, so I had to because I'm stealing some of that. I had to refocus myself, and remember for my church, the whole issue of dealing with where's the core now in the height of the pandemic was one of the things that really stressed me out, because all of my core consisted of the vulnerable population. So they were all older or had health conditions, and I couldn't pull on people who were the ones I would normally pull on. Either they had anxiety, or as their pastor, I didn't want to put them in a position where they could be exposed to something. So a lot of stuff during that year and a half was just me. When I got to a place where I could start bringing in others, it really became who made themselves available. It was really just who did God lay on my spirit, or who reached out and said, Pastor, where do you need me? What can I do? One example, my minister of music was our children's church teacher, because she said, Pastor, I want to do something for the children. Can we do children's church? She brought that up, and she started doing Zoom with them 1 hour before worship. Some of my other members, some of my younger members, at certain periods could help out with social media. Now, again, because of COVID, some of them experienced things, whether it was sickness, depression, different things, and they kind of fell off, which made me say, okay, how do I really work this? Because the foundations were just shaking throughout the entire season. Now getting to this place of entering, whatever the next normal is, one of the things that has blessed me is being able to utilize my family. So Sunday morning, my children, Joshua and Lillian, Walter and Lord Jesus, I keep calling my son my brother's name, Walter and Lillian, ages 7 and 10, are my media team, and they are running the switcher and the online stream. My wife is serving with the music ministry in more of a greater capacity now than she did before. So I have them. I have other leaders who have stepped up, who have said, I'll be available. I'll be there to serve in these different areas. And it's helped me see who are future persons who will serve in other leadership positions. With the deacons, the greatest thing First Baptist had before I got there was their family life teams. And that has proved pivotal in this season. As Bobby said, those calls, those staying connected, because I couldn't do it with everybody. If I did, y'all wouldn't be seeing me right now. Y'all would have been at my celebration of life services at the end of last year. So they stayed connected with everybody and kept that touch. And some of them, again, being proactive. One day we got a card here in the mail, and I was like, what is this? It came from our family life team, our deacon and deaconess at the church. They were sending out cards to members to keep them connected, keep them engaged, to let them know the church still cares. And so one of the keys of core became realizing, even though I don't have the people, or I can't necessarily rely on or pull on the people I did before, doesn't mean there aren't people there who God is lifting up to now lead us in this season. That there is a new leadership group, if you will, that will now step in and take the reins of what the church is now. And the ones before, and for the most part, at least from what I've seen so far, do not mind.
Yeah.
They don't mind having somebody else come in and lead, because many of them know that they do not have the resource bank to lead in this type of environment. But they're grateful that there is something going on, that there is a church that exists that needs leadership.
That's awesome. I think I want to. So that's great. I'm going to link in the show notes the stuff we told Pastor Danielle, those 5 pieces. I'm going to link that, but if you can send them so I get them right. So that people kind of know. Well, I'm linking a picture of your kids, because that joint is super. I remember the picture, so I'm sending it. It's on social. Let you pull it down. But I want to end talking about the pivot of students, because I want to be good with our time for those who are watching, those who are listening. So you think about that, but I also can't fully end without talking about giving, right? We haven't spoken on giving, and I think giving is a major pivot that I think we would be super horrible to have this conversation about pivots for the year and not talk about it. I know one of the reflections that we had, and again, shout out to Givelify, was being able to understand where people were giving from, and understanding that the old thought of if it's weather, especially us in this area, y'all who are in Florida and Texas, we're praying for y'all. But up here, when it snows or it rains, it's like, they may not come, it may not, but it shifted during the pandemic. So if we can touch on giving for a second, and then I really want to close on thinking about students and how do we pivot students in this season. So anybody can go first, and we can go from there.
I'll share 2 things about giving. The first one actually ties into something somebody said earlier about there being value in traditional means. I know we've got the giving apps and being able to give online and everything. One of the things that amazed me most was how many folk would either mail in their offerings or would drive by the church to drop it off. For some people, that was the only time they got out the house, was driving up to the building and dropping off their envelopes. And so I realized that while I'm pushing electronic and online, I couldn't neglect all of the ways that we give. I couldn't neglect all the things we have on that lower third that say ways to give. Each of them have value. And truthfully, I was thinking about this preparing for today. If we had had the resources or the foresight to do so, there could have been things that we had set up at the building for, whether it is like a sign of saying, you know, we're praying for you or something there, just for those who were driving through the campus. We did have some drive-through activities where persons were there, where people were giving, and persons were there to pray for them and different things like that. But there could have been something there that was stationary as well. But as one of the things I learned about giving, though, and this is the second thing I want to share, and I got this from my pastor, was because of the uniqueness of this time, was to always give the invitation for persons to sow into the ministry, no matter what you have going on. One running joke he has is that he pastors a Baptist church, so no matter what happens, there's always an offering. Outside of meetings, anything we ever had at New Psalmist growing up, there was an offering. Baby blessing, baptism, Sunday morning, we have an offering. And so I was laughing at him one night because they were doing a prayer call, and I tuned on. At the end of the prayer call, he said, "Now it's offering time." I'm like, "What in the world, y'all? We done hopped on conference call and now it's offering time." But he told me, he said, "You never know when you're either giving somebody an invitation to sow into the vision, or you're reminding them of what they plan to do, but the tyranny of the urgent may have caught them." And so one of the things learned in this space was to always give that invitation, and whoever accepts it, they then are able to give and bless the ministry, bless the mission and the vision that you're working towards. But to always be intentional about sharing what you're doing. And in sharing what you're doing is not just the missions and the outreach perspective. It's not just the latest and greatest things that you got at the church. But one of the things I gleaned from a gentleman I follow on social media, Brady Shearer, is to also share that what people are giving towards is the everyday function of the church. While folk don't want to hear that their giving is going towards salary and bills, it is. And you may not feel comfortable standing there saying that. It is the everyday work of the church. That is also a part of what person's gifts and giving goes toward. And so also make sure you highlight that.
That's great. That's great.
Go ahead, Dr. Ray.
Like a double Dutch. No, I double down on everything that Pastor Walt just said. One of the major things what you said, Pastor Walt, never underestimate the fact that for many people, writing the check is an act of worship. And so for a lot of my folks, baby boomers, particularly builders as well, they weren't against online giving because they pay their bills online. But but for them, when they get to church, as much as lifting their hands to worship, taking their hand and their pen and writing out their tithe check was an act of worship. And so for the first 3 or 4 weeks, everything was online for us as far as giving. And then we started saying, now, if you want to mail your offering, here's where you mail it to. And I'm realizing 2 years later, still between 25% to 33% of our giving is people dropping it off, mailing it in, or now that we're back in the building, dropping it in a box on the way out. And so that's an important, just making sure that we honor all of the methods of giving is huge. But here's one pivot that I've been making recently. I know that's what you asked for. Is however if we have online givers, if you do give online, me as the pastor being okay with saying, "Hey, have you thought about making your giving recurring?" And just making that, like, so I'm once a month, I do the offering appeal at our church. And I was up there with Lavera and I was like, "Hey, the way we give is through our online option, and we click recurring so that our giving is a normal and automatic part of our financial stewardship." And I want to encourage you to think about doing the same, and just making sure that you take the opportunity to encourage, particularly the people who are giving, to make their giving recurring, I believe you'll find that will be beneficial for you going forward.
I think all of that is true, but I want to look at giving from another perspective, because you talked about membership, right? But this is a pivot that we are having to make. I started tracking first-time givers. I attended a service at Enon Tabernacle in Philadelphia, Dr. Alan Waller. And I gave an offering, and within a week, I got a letter from Enon Tabernacle, and I felt like that little offering I gave was like the only offering Enon Tabernacle ever got. I sent them some more money. And so I decided, hey, I want to acknowledge first-time givers because I thought that was an amazing thing. What I found was that people that were first-time givers on the first Sunday in October have now become consistent givers. And then it doesn't take much to look at those trends, right? They're tithing, right? You can tell a tithe when that same number hits at a certain rhythm, like, wait, that person is a tither. But guess what? They're not on the roll. They're not people that have ever been in the building. So here's this. When you look at giving, we also have to reconsider membership, because there's certain rights and responsibilities. And I'm Baptist, we're Baptist. And so you got to get the right hand of fellowship. And then you have all the rights and responsibilities of being a member of a church. But who is my member?
Yeah.
Is it the person who's had right hand of fellowship that has only given a quarter in the last 5 years? Or is it the person who's never walked the aisle, maybe has never even come into this building because they connected with us virtually, but they are financially supporting God's work every Sunday? And they're honoring the biblical principle of the tithe. Who is my member? And so I think we have to also look at our giving and the giving patterns of people who is giving, and then make sure that when we're sending out perks for membership or, just different things, that those people that are also financially supporting but are not members in terms of the role, that they're getting the same rights and responsibilities because they are, in every sense of the way, supporting God's work through that house.
Amen.
That's great. I think that's great. And for those of you who are listening and can't watch, you got to tune on, because as Pastor Brown was talking through those points, Pastor Bobby was shouting. He had to turn himself on mute.
Look, I had to go on mute to say amen to the preacher, because I didn't want to be a distraction, but she was preaching better than we were saying amen.
Amen. So I appreciate y'all. We're right up against time, and I want to be good with those who are listening, who are watching. And so I want us to hit this student piece. And then anything that you have that's final, that is pivotal, hit that as well, and then we'll close out. And so anybody can start with the student piece, pivoting students. And you all have said it, but I want to make it clear, because sometimes some things are taught, some things are caught. I'd rather this be a little more taught.
I'll say for us, it gave us the grace to reset what we were doing. With our church, again, traditional Baptist church, older congregation, what have you, we've always been trying to see, since I've gotten there, how do we get more young people engaged? How do we get them involved? And we had a couple things, a couple events, activities that, gave us a spike and every now and then, but it would fizzle. And so we have been looking at, how do we make this more consistent? The pandemic gave us the grace to really reset, because a lot of what we were looking at were just new forms of what had been, or trying to make little tweaks to what had been. And this is now giving us a chance to really look at, now we can do everything differently. And so that's kind of where we are right now, is actually resetting not just the student model, but every model of ministry. Whether it is combining ministries, retiring ministries, revamping ministries, whatever it is, all of that is now in the same category. But with the student piece, it really has given us that grace to say, we can actually do something different and try something new, as opposed to thinking we got to just keep going along to get along, because that kind of became the mindset. You don't want to lose them, so you want to keep going along with things. But then when COVID shut the world down, it was like, all right, I've given you a place now to really look at this and remodel it. And because of the way in which this thing has happened, it's also given us a way to get kids involved in other areas until we can formalize what their unique thing looks like. So whether it is my young people who I have being TikTok ambassadors, or again, my media team or what have you, they're doing other things right now where they're staying active in ministry and involved in ministry until we really can form their space. One of my early meetings when I first became pastor of First Baptist, I remember it vividly, was the first time I kind of had somebody buck back at me because I suggested shutting down Sunday school, to revamp it, to put a new model in. And it seemed as though I was now a heretic and I had cursed God and I should die because I suggested that. But COVID said, no, I'm shutting everything down. And now we can look at bringing it in where it can still be Sunday school or whatever it is, but now you have taken the time to actually do the work and build a structure that'll be supported, as opposed to one that's been there, but the supports are just about rusted through and about to fall.
That's great.
I have outlawed certain language around here to help kind of. I don't believe in young adult ministries.
Okay.
And the reason I don't is because I feel that they send the message to younger adults that this church isn't yours. Y'all go over here and you have like this thing over here, and then the main church, for lack of a better word, gets to go unchanged. Y'all go over there and create that thing that you want, while we all sit here and we continue to do what we've always done, the way we've always done it, unchallenged, unchanged, and grow older and older and older. And then we look up one day and we're reaching back and trying to figure out, well, where is the next generation? Well, they're over there where we sent them. And so I've kind of outlawed that language here. We don't have a young adult ministry at Shiloh anymore. But what I believe in is immersion. So the choir was the first group that I said, hey, well, we're not going to do young adult. I want everybody to sing together. And now everyone sings together, but we're seeing more and more younger people, right, joining the choir. We got a whole, our band. I don't think any of them are over 40. They're all young. And so every Sunday, if you come in Shiloh, if you watch our broadcast, all of the newer, our new band, our leaders, they're younger people. And so when younger people see younger people and they're leading the church, not just leading over here. And it also helps that they have a younger pastor. So I want younger people leading in every capacity. That you can be 20 and be a deacon. You can be, this age and be in very specific and integral places. But now student ministries, we have shifted to instead of a young adult ministry, to a college and emerging adult ministry. Okay. And that college ministry is also not just, and we're still building and getting the right people in place, but it can't just be us sitting and waiting on the college students who are in the church to support, but it's also a going. That let's go to Rutgers University, let's go to Keene University, let's go to the local schools that are around and establish a presence there that ultimately will filter people into the church, right? Or onto our online and things like that. But let's go and in turn get these people to come in, because we have meaningful things that are worth them, connecting their lives to. So that's one of the pivots that I have made in the life of Shiloh, is that I've said, yeah, we're not going to just relegate people in their 20s and 30s over here. And then I've been intentional about making sure that those demographics know that they don't have to have a go-between, that I am as much their pastor as I am their mother and their granddaddy's pastor, right? That you can come directly to me. You don't have to go to a mediator or like a young adult pastor. No, I'm your pastor, and you are as much a part of this church and worthy of everything. Come in and contribute as anyone else.
That's great.
If I could just kind of talk in regards to student ministry, in regards to programming, I'll just say it. I'll say this not as an expert, but as someone who has taken some lumps over the pandemic in regards to student ministry, that don't make the mistake of trying to do for the youth what you do for the adults, just in a youthier way. that might have worked when everything was in person, but now that everything is virtual, so when everything was in person, you were inviting the youth into a controlled environment that was your specialty. When things are virtual, you are going into a controlled environment that is their specialty. You won't out online engage Gen Zers, no matter how you try, for all you Baptist folks. And so here's what I learned. An hour-long online youth service is a joke. Stop trying it. This is the generation that if a TikTok is longer than 30 seconds, they scroll. And so you have to figure out a way to engage Gen Z on their terms. And then from there, it's about relationship.
That's great.
And so we through the pandemic, I was challenging my youth director. You know what? You could throw the party. I don't care. Anybody can throw a party. What I want you to do is I want you to teach our young people in short snips. And I want you to make phone calls. I want you to be in their DMs. I want you to be texting them and I want you to be engaging them in what they're learning from what you're producing, but also what they're learning from what, in youth circles, we call it big church, and what big church is producing, because I want them engaging. They got a pastor that can speak their language. And so I don't want to hear no excuses about how they don't want to be in big church and how they can't. No, y'all love Pastor Bobby. What'd you hear him say Sunday? And I want you, and let's build the relationships from there. But let's not try to do in online spaces what we tried to do in physical spaces with our youth, because they not here for it. If you think your retention rate is low in the analytics with the adults, look at it with your kids, with your students, with your youth.
No, that's great. And I think, and I appreciate you all. I think we could keep going with some other stuff, but I want to pause here. And I want to thank you all for sharing. Again, if you are watching, if you're listening, there will be show notes. Please follow Pastor Thomas, Pastor Brown, Pastor Manning, because I believe there's more that they have to share. There's more that you can glean. You heard them reference several times their broadcast. Hopefully you're going to be able to watch and kind of hear, because we all learn from each other. Somebody said it early on. This pandemic helped for us to have a reset. Totally with Pastor Walt, because nobody knows the answer. Which is why these, I think, are helpful, and because God is doing a different thing in all different places. So again, thank you all for getting on to Ministry Pivot. Don't forget about the Ministry Pivot online. And again, we're working on creating a community around this. So Pivot University is coming toward the second quarter of this year. Please make sure that you subscribe, that you like, that you follow, so that we can be engaged and we can learn from each other. So until next time, don't forget that this is your season of opportunity. Reverend Russ, super excited that you decided to join us. Again, thanks to my guests on today, and we will see you soon. God bless.